Welcome back to the Bolus Maximus podcast. My name is Matthew Taro. I'm here with my co-founder and co-host, Brandon A. Denson. What's up,
going on,
Brandon?
guys? Hey, what's up? I jumped in a little bit before you on that one, but yeah, man, we're here to talk some clinical trial stuff and let's talk tough stuff.
We've got a podcast guest today, Nicole Fisher. She's the host of Clinical Mistrials and Health Equity and Ethics Expert. Nicole, good morning. Hello, how are you?
Good afternoon from Chicago.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, good morning on your end for sure.
We're behind you. Behind you.
Yeah.
Well, it is a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for making some time on this Sunday morning. Really looking forward to this conversation. We almost jumped into it too soon. Brandon just started to talk about. Brandon, take it away, man. Go ahead. Let's get right into it.
Hey, man, I think this is a long overdue conversation. Just speaking with you, Nicole, in regards to health equity and just clinical trials in general. But I would just like to say, can you introduce yourself to the people and let them know exactly what it is that you do in your respective field in the clinical research?
Yeah, well, I got into clinical trials maybe 5 years after I graduated from college. So I've always worked in research. I worked in epidemiology, focusing on trust and mistrust between the community and with public health entities. That's how I started at the University of Michigan. And I found myself in Chicago working at the Cancer Center in clinical trials and clinical research, oncology specifically. But in Chicago, doing that work at like community clinics called federally qualified health centers, those FQHCs. So those are like, on the south side of Chicago, the west side of Chicago, really focusing on, medically marginalized areas and patients that don't have the best access to healthcare. So that's kind of how I got my start. And then I transitioned that into pediatrics and a clinical research organization, a CRO, which is like this weird go-between between a hospital and a pharmaceutical company. They basically like crank out all the work. And I was there for 6 months, and I can tell you a story about why that was. But now I am in pharma. So I work, with the sponsor as a sponsor. And I made that transition really because it felt like a lot of the programs and the projects that I wanted to develop and to start to really improve health equity and research equity in, our communities, I wasn't able to give the best. I just wasn't able to do it from a clinical standpoint or from a site standpoint. It really needs to happen, at the source as a pharmaceutical company. So that's my journey. That's where I'm at now. But I started the podcast in the middle of the pandemic, really. Like I had a lot of time on my hands. I switched jobs like 3 times in the pandemic. What I guess as a lot of people did during the Great Resignation. And, during that time, I feel like clinical trials really came to the forefront and people were really trying to understand, how long does it take? Can we trust it? Who's Moderna, right? Like that's a new player. So people were really paying attention. And the stories I kept hearing, on NPR when I would turn it on in the mornings, like, of course, there's going to be vaccine hesitancy, in these communities. If you look at the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, but it was always the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And I'm like, yo, there's so many reasons why, like, let's not pretend that like there was one bad thing that happened to Black people. And like, that was just it for us. We're like, never again. Like things have happened to Blacks, to Browns, to plenty of people. And it's embedded a deep-seated mistrust. So that's kind of what got me started on the podcast.
That Tuskegee syphilis experiment is interesting that you bring that up, because a lot of people of color or Black people, when you think about it, like that's kind of like the only one that you know about. But like you said, there's so many more experiments that have happened that really don't get the attention that one has. And it's also interesting, there are people that were involved in that experiment, that trial, that are still currently living. Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's just like
Mhm.
when we talk about that trust aspect, um, it goes really deep,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, if you're that close to something and you understand what those individuals that participated in that had to participate in that study,
Yeah.
and you see what has happened, I think that will make anybody not want to trust and get involved in something, or just be like, hey, yeah, sign me up. You know what I mean? Because like you see the trauma and the problems that just that one
Yeah.
research clinical trial caused.
And it's generational trauma. Like it didn't just, yeah, there are people who are still alive, but I mean, you infect, a community with syphilis, that's your kids are going to have syphilis, and then your grandkids are going to have syphilis, and they're going to have birth defects from that.
Yeah.
It's not just, it doesn't end there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree. Oh, sorry. I swear I put on
Do
do
not
not
disturb.
disturb, but
It's
my
it's
little
okay.
sister,
Look,
yeah,
it's okay.
my little sister FaceTimes me 6 times a day. Like
Siblings.
she is my shadow, even though she's in
Yeah.
Michigan.
Let me just say, I from without doing research, it always sounded like that was the one study that was the that's what broke the camel's back, but it was like there's so much more. And Brandon and I were talking about it last week, but to your point, from a white person, I had no idea. My
Mhm.
family, I grew up in a medical family. It's like the opposite. I was like, I love science. I trust everything that I was like, I don't, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So that's why I was really excited to have this conversation, because I think it is such a, um, there's this idea of prevention versus healing, right?
Mhm.
Trying to prevent certain things. We talk about diabetes. We don't.
Mhm.
Brandon and I are not medical professionals. Nicole, you are a clinical research professional, but just in our experiences, what, almost 40 years of diabetes between us, right?
Correct.
You know,
Yeah.
that's old. That's more years than either one of us have been alive.
Mhm.
Um, and so our goal is to try to make people aware of what can they do. What is it
Mhm.
that they have the power to do, and hopefully they understand that they can change. If they don't feel comfortable, that they should speak to somebody. Um,
Yeah.
who,
And I think
who's the
that's a really good point.
who's the most
Yeah.
important person? If I could start there, and I'll let Brandon come in with the questions that he's got. Who's the most important person for someone of color to speak with that is interested in getting into research studies?
Yeah, that's okay. So the studies show that, patients like to hear about opportunities for clinical trials from their physician.
Mm.
That's not usually how that goes. From my experience working in clinical trials, it's usually a clinical trial coordinator will go and introduce it, and then potentially a physician is there to get them to sign off on it. I think my answer to that would be whoever you're most comfortable with. So, and I mean, I think that I hate putting like a kind of blanket, response onto something that can be that's so personal. I think that we should take a bespoke kind of approach to it. A if your relationship with your nurse is really solid, then ask your nurse about that clinical trial. One of my best friends is we were just texting this morning. She's trying to find a clinical trial to get into. She has stage 4 colon cancer. And we're trying, she's like, okay, I can go to UPenn, I can go here. I don't even know who to talk to about it. She reached out to me. She doesn't really have anybody. I mean, her parents are physicians, but like as far as her clinical staff, she's like, yeah, they're just kind of, they give you the options and they're like, this is your decision at the end of the day. So yeah, I think my answer to that is whoever you feel the most comfortable and confident with, follow your gut with that. But your doctor will have the most information.
All right, and then one follow-up question to that: what kind of, from a healthcare perspective and clinical or clinician uh, perspective, what is done to help patients enter into those programs? Is there anything other than
Mm.
what your design and what you're set up in architecting? Other than that, is there an onboarding process to help clinicians understand how difficult it is for patients to come in and say that they want to be a part of something.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So we have like these SIVs, like a site initiation visit, and that is supposed to be what you're kind of talking about. It's like before you actually start the trial, before you have your first patient in or first patient enrolled, um, the pharmaceutical reps will come to the hospital, to whatever clinic that will be conducting that clinical trial, and then they do a run through with the physician, with the clinical trial coordinator. Sometimes if it's really done well, they'll look through the EMR, like the medical records, to help you identify patients who might be eligible. I mean, they can't look at it, but they'll ask you to at least give them an idea of how many patients you might be able to enroll successfully. So
Mhm.
there is a little bit of that. And then there's a long training, and they'll go through the protocol with you. I don't think that it's a sufficient process. We never, I want to be really careful with what I say, I guess, but do I? Um, we
Go on.
never took that totally seriously,
Right.
you know? Um, I think there's a lot more that we could do to better prepare the clinical staff, like you said, for the barriers that will meet patients at in participating, getting them enrolled, and then continuing on for the studies. Like these are long, and a lot of them are long-term studies. You want to get them in, you want to keep them on. So yeah.
I mean, the one thing that stands out, again, it just plays right into our conversation that Brandon is prepared, but it sounds like the first part is a patient hearing from the clinicians, but ultimately it's being driven by pharma.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's already, for most people in our community, that's I know. So like now, and that's not disrespectful towards what they're trying to do or how they're doing it, but the overall outlook is, I can imagine a lot of diseases, ailments, cancers. Yeah, they need people to come in and do certain trials,
Yep.
and those people have to do this. They feel like whereas we're like, yo, you're holding insulin from us for X amount of money, which means we don't care about anything else that you're doing a lot of times, and it turns us off. But
Okay.
there are individuals like Mr. Brandon A. Denson here, who himself was I just shut my video off, who was a participant in a study. So I know Brandon's got some good questions here. I'm going to transition over to.
Yeah, I'd love
Yeah.
to hear your experience.
I'll say, one thing that I stand firm on with doing anything is, and this comes from, being working in the city of Detroit, working in the schools, playing sports, being a team player. Like I'm never going to tell somebody to do something that I wouldn't do or that I haven't done. And I think when we look at the clinical trials and research and things like that, I can't advocate and tell somebody to get involved in something that I've never done. Like that's not a good that to me that's a terrible person to follow, right? And I'm not going to say I was just super eager to do it because I had never really talked to anybody about it. And it's funny, not to give you any not to give you any what is the word I'm looking for? Because you went to U of M, but that's where I used to get my care at for my endocrinology. That's where I was diagnosed at U of M. Obviously, we have a history. We went to high school together.
Right.
Went to Willow Run together. But when I was first diagnosed and I was coming back from school from Michigan State, I still would see my endocrinologist at University of Michigan, and I saw things around like clinical research and trials and stuff, and you could get involved, but a lot of that stuff was for type 2 patients. It was never anything that they had for type 1 diabetes. So I always will ask like my endocrinologist or my nurse, and it's like, well, we don't have anything, but we'll let you know. So fast forward maybe 10 years, and I'm in California, 10, 12 years. I'm in California, and I'm really deep into the diabetes community. I'm listening to different things, and I'm hearing about clinical research, trials, and things. I still at the top of my brain that I want to get involved. I want to try it. I mean, still, even at this point, I don't know any people of color, any black people that have done it, but that hasn't. It never deterred me from wanting to do it, but it also made me curious to kind of figure out like why black people aren't involved, why people of color aren't involved, and I think through actually going through the process, what it opened me up to is one, there is a huge piece of lack of trust. We know that from just everyday physicians. We understand that from people of color going to the doctors, trusting physicians, having to deal with people that don't necessarily look like them, and taking advice from people that don't look like them or understand them on their demographics or their culture, which plays a huge role in a lot of these things that we do or that we see as well. But then I think it take it a step further. I wanted to really dig deep and get involved in a clinical research trial because for me, it will it would have it was going to give me the necessary set of eyes that I needed to put on something myself and then go through that process because I always enjoyed the process and figuring out the process of what's what from start to finish because then that way I can understand everything from the intake to filling out information, filling out the forms, from actually talking to the nurses because there is a process that you have to go through even though you sign up for a clinical trial, you may be an ideal participant, you still can get kicked out due to maybe some other complications or anything else that may disqualify you from that particular trial. So going through that process, it is a tedious process. But I think the staff that I work with, they handled everything really well. They answered questions that I needed, but I also look at like, what if I was in that situation, miseducated, didn't really understand, didn't know how to advocate for myself? What does that do to somebody maybe that doesn't speak English? What does that do to somebody that doesn't really understand the verbiage and the language on those forms? Because it's a lot of information. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I'm going through this as like, somebody that somewhat understands this information, can digest it, can understand what are the next steps to come after that. And, one thing that I will say that really stood out to me, they were like, you're not forced to do this. So at any point in time, you can stop. So I think that is something that was really good to hear because I think some people be like, oh well, I have to finish it to get paid and I have to do this. So it's a lot of different things that I think of, when I did the study and I did a very, very intensive study and they were like the nurses, the doctors, they were like, I can't believe this is your first clinical trial and you're doing this one. It's like, well, I just signed up. I
You
didn't know
had
I
no
got
idea.
it. I didn't know. I was like, hey, well, give me the easiest one you have. It was just more so like, I'm doing this because I want to see what goes into it, how the patient is treated. What like it was intense. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. It was a very, very intense study. Was it worth the money? No, in my opinion. I'm gonna be just 100% honest. You know what I mean? But like it was a very unique experience that I can talk to people about and they can base whether they will want to get involved in a clinical trial or not based off of that
Mhm.
information.
Mhm. Yeah, that was yeah. I had so many thoughts
It
as
was a
you were
lot. I
talking.
rambled a little bit, but it's
No, you
it's
didn't.
even when
No.
when I think about it, like even now to this day, it's like there was one person of color that was on that staff.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So these are things that I think about like I have to stay overnight there. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I have to trust these individuals that I'm seeing a set of three individuals at night when I check in, and then I'm being catered to by a completely different set of individuals by the early morning throughout the rest of the day. So you know what I mean? You got so much changeover, and it's like, oh yeah, well, she didn't come in tonight. So it's like, whoa, so where's it? I never even seen this person. You know what I mean? So it's just
Mm-hmm.
like they're drawing blood, you're getting IVs, you're getting your blood sugar check, like all of these different things. And it's like, wait, hold on. I just started getting comfortable with the other person that was here. Now you mean that
Uh-huh.
they're not here? You know what I mean? So
Yeah, that's
like,
an intense study. That was an intense study. I've
yeah.
actually not participated on a study that like involved where it's I mean, I guess it is overnight, but like for you to be there. So Yeah, you did a lot. I didn't want
You
you
did.
did a
We're
lot.
we're talking 7. I'm checking in at 7 p.m. and I'm not
Okay.
leaving until 3:30 the next day.
Just
3
for the study.
just for the study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was like, I was watching, he was in San Diego while he was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And some days, he would either, sometimes we would do work and then he would leave and go there. Or a lot of times I would see him right afterwards and he was hit. Like, and I know that that he's capable. He's a strong individual. That's one strong man. Um, and I was like, geez, okay.
Hmm.
I see what's going on here.
Yeah.
Physically, physically and mentally draining. And I think when ultimately when I got to the middle, because there was a guy that dropped out, and I was like, I'm gonna finish this. Like, you know what I mean? It wasn't like a contest or a test, but it was just like, dude, I've come this far. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
I've come, and you really think about it, like it is really a lot. I mean, far as like I said, like you're getting your blood sugar checked, you're getting actually I don't even think it's really the blood sugar checks, it's the blood draws that happen so often. And
Hmm.
you're talking every 2 to 3 minutes, like, like, and it goes from like this 30 minute to like this tight window, and it's crazy. Like I can't make this up, and I don't want to like put this out there to scare anybody, but it's something that I'm always the type of person that's like, try it, you try it, it doesn't work. You also have the opportunity to try it and stop if you don't like it. If you get in there and the first night you're like, I'm good, you get cold feet, you don't
Yeah.
have to continue. They can't make you continue to do it,
Hmm.
and that's one thing. Like I said, they said like, I think I said something playing around. I was like, no, you don't have to. I was like, oh, I'm quit. I'm not coming back. Like, you know what I mean? And they were like, no, you don't have to. I was like, no, I'm just playing with y'all. You know what I mean? But it's just a simple fact. Like, I think from people of color, the black community, like I do want people to get involved, but I do understand,
Hmm.
like how big of a challenge that is. We can't overlook what has happened in the past, and some bad things have happened in the past. So I can
Hmm.
understand, people being where they are with things.
Yeah. And there's a lot in that too. Like, first of all, I would like to say I really love that they emphasize the fact that you could drop out anytime, because that's something that I think it's like when we talk about consent, like consent is a continuous process throughout the entire life cycle of a clinical trial, right?
Yep.
So you can say yes, you can say no, whenever. Um, I mean, from a okay, yeah, the trust barrier, absolutely, that's there. But when you're participating in a clinical trial that's also more than just you contributing to the body of science. I'm doing this for the good of my diabetes community. But if you're participating in a clinical trial that could very well like extend your life, like a lot of clinical trials can, um it becomes so much more than trust. Like when you make it that arduous and difficult to participate, especially for populations that might not have the proper support in place, might not be able to take off from work, like there's and you're right, it is so tight. The protocol and the windows, the study windows, et cetera, are so rigorous and tight just by design. And this is something that I've kind of been talking about the last year or so. Equity by design. If you are not designing your clinical trial protocols in a way that are equitable, you are automatically excluding people, and probably people of color.
Yep.
So that's something you have to think about. I mean, regardless, I mean, and also no one wants to wake up every 2 and 3 minutes for, like it's also just a pain in the butt.
So
Yeah.
Mhm.
is that the type of stuff? And if you don't mind me asking, some of what you speak about on your podcast, is that, could you give us a little insight? Where does Brandon's experience, it's obviously not a competition, but where does it size up against, where you've had these conversations? Are people giving you more information? Are people scared to give information when they do
Mhm.
talk? Are they just really freely giving it because they want others to hear it? Or is it, it's not a complaint, but it's a grievance? I don't know what it's,
Mhm.
like, how does that sound?
How does that? Yeah.
Yeah, to you. Yeah.
So I actually haven't interviewed many people for the podcast. The podcast is like, me kind of storytelling, like it's true crime, right?
Okay.
I did have opportunity to interview a woman whose father participated in one of the most gruesome clinical trials I've ever come across in my life. Just to understand her experience and how it affected her family generationally.
Okay.
But in my experience working in hospitals and, just with friends and family, because people know, the work that I do, and they'll come and tell me their story. I would say, I mean, it's kind of like it's a little typical, like people often complain about, the protocols and the tightness and, either or. What I typically get is that people feel like they are being excluded. So it's there's a both and, like it's also hard. Back in the day, it was challenging to have the ethics in place where we were not over enrolling patients that were marginalized. Now it's kind of the flip. And I see a lot of patients saying that they can't get access to clinical trials that are life-saving and worthwhile. So that's also why I try to be very careful in my messaging, and especially like with the podcast, and try to tell people it's true crime. It's mostly, for historical entertainment value, but like clinical trials are helpful, like I believe
Yeah.
in science, but so yeah, I think Brandon's story falls in that typical kind of bandwidth, like, okay, if I have gotten into a clinical trial, now I'm in it, now it's a lot. Now it kind of feels like it might be too much for me, and I don't know that I'm getting much out of it. Like,
Do they use, if Brandon or the individual that did drop out of the study that he was in, they're still using that data up until the point that they leave, or can they not use that for a trial if somebody exits the trial?
you can choose.
Oh, okay.
You can choose. For most studies, I've seen it where the consent is if you want to withdraw, you can. You can submit a request to have all of your information destroyed. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Interesting. That's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I didn't even know that, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
It's in that tiny, it's like it's some tiny fine print.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like these consent forms they can be, I've seen them 30, 40 pages long. And you brought up a point earlier, Brandon, like, this could be even more challenging for someone who, English is not their first language. And oftentimes I talk about this all the time. Like I feel like the most unethical thing I've ever done in my career has been, giving someone who does not speak English a little like consent waiver form, just like calling a random company. I don't know these people, hoping that they're translating what I'm saying in this 30-page document to this patient or to the parent of the child who is the patient, and then getting them to sign a document that's in Spanish or Polish or whatever that I can't read, but they can read, and, hoping that they've gotten it, hoping that they understood, their rights. So like, if you didn't know that, I bet you I bet you they don't know either.
exactly. And that's that goes back. It all, a lot of this boils down to ultimately the trust. I think you have people like myself that wanted to get involved in a clinical trial,
Mm.
which is like, I want to play my part. Like you said, when you have that, when you can put on there and say, hey, this could help save somebody's life, yours or others that have the same disease or complications and things that you have, it kind of triggers you a little bit differently. Your thought process, like, well, dang, if my mom has this, like I could possibly be helping her, or my little brother or my cousin or my aunt. So your thought process goes, in a different direction. But then also, like I think the bigger one of the biggest barriers that I feel just in when we're talking pharmaceuticals, when we're talking clinical trials, when we're talking hospital settings or anything, it's it all boils down to the trust. In my opinion, it's the trust. It's the trust. The trust. I mean, you can't do anything without trust. But I think in these settings, where you're not used to seeing somebody like you, or you're not talking to somebody about the issues that you have. It just makes things a lot more complicated,
Mhm.
but when you can talk to somebody that has either been through it or is very knowledgeable about it, they tend to you tend to feel more comfortable and relaxed. And you said that in the very beginning too. You was like,
Mhm.
the best thing that you can do is talk to somebody that you feel most comfortable about, or
Mhm.
comfortable with.
Mhm.
That way you have a full understanding. Is like, yeah, I want to do it, or I'm still on the fence. Maybe I need to talk to a couple more people. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and I think yes, and I think that like racial or language concordance like in the medical field is important. So it I mean, it's just a natural kind of like skip level. So if you have someone who's, a doctor who's black and you have a patient who's black, like you immediately are just going, I'm sorry. It is what it is. You're just going to immediately connect. If you have, a physician who speaks Spanish and a patient who speaks Spanish, they're going to want to connect with that doctor. And I think, there's a lot of things or a lot of education in place now for doctors, like cultural competency courses. And I used to develop some of those courses at UIC here. And those are great. And it helps people understand how to break down those barriers to become someone who, your patients can trust. But it's a quicker, you get there more quickly if you have staff that already meet those cultural competencies. It's innate within them because they're a part of that culture. So yeah, it's
you
important.
correct.
Hmm.
I told Matt that I had one more question, but I actually have two.
Okay.
Of course.
So I I want to know, what do you think that could help change the narrative of having more, because you've been in this field for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So I'm I'm sure there probably aren't a lot of people of color or black individuals in this field. Do you think that that will help people, if they had held positions, people of color held positions like you? Do you think that that will help? Because I know that that field,
Mm.
it's a very, I don't want to use the
White.
word segregated, but it's a very, yeah, it's a
Hmm.
very kind of plain field, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think my perspective might be like, so I am a part of a couple of organizations like Black Women in Clinical Research, or there are some of us. There's a good amount of us. I think that it is important for pharmaceutical companies and sponsors right now. Like a lot of pharmaceutical companies are developing a new function that's like focused on diversity in clinical trials because the FDA put out that guidance a couple years ago, right? Like we got to focus on this now. And my company recently did that, and they appointed. Um, she's black, but she's also Latinx. They appointed her as director. So I think that where it's going to be most key is making sure that the people who are heading up those departments and those functions, that those are, people of the communities that you're interested in enrolling from a diverse perspective.
Okay. That
Yeah.
makes that makes sense. That makes sense.
Hmm.
Definitely.
I mean,
Definitely.
the clinical trial coordinators too, but I've seen it could be because I'm in Chicago, but I've seen like, a pretty diverse mix there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. No, thank you. And
Hmm.
There are
so
a
there,
lot more women. There are a lot more women. It feels like, nurses,
Hmm.
researchers, staff in general. It feels like it's mostly women.
I don't I don't
Definitely.
I don't think I haven't. I've never interacted with a black male nurse,
Mm.
ever. Not once in
Mm.
my life. I've never interacted.
That's wild.
I've never seen, yeah,
That's
that's
wild. You're
I've never
right.
I've never interacted
Mm.
personally with a black male nurse. I
I
haven't.
don't I don't know that I have. I'm really thinking. That's
Like,
crazy.
never, not once, through
Yeah.
anything like having surgeries,
Mm.
diabetes, ophthalmology. Like, I've never, like, in that setting. I've never, and it kind of makes me really think now. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
that's
like,
Yeah.
crazy. I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm so glad you brought that up, dude,
yeah,
because that is so important to hear,
Hmm.
for other people to hear, mothers and fathers and caretakers of young black men, and knowing that there's a major, it's not just that they're not in the industry, it's just the overall industry is stressed. There's a lot of politics, and ultimately it falls on the individual people who are in the room with you at time of diagnosis and telling you the bad news, and then it's like you never trust the system again. For some people, and others, they come into the hospital and they're like, yeah, I'm like, all right, shoot, go ahead, do whatever you need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've seen it sometimes where if there isn't like someone who's diverse, if there isn't someone who looks like the patient on a care team, they'll bring folks in. I've been one of those people where I've been brought in for a patient. She had to get a stem cell transplant. She had MDS and I had to be in there. And this is what triggered this memory for me. When you were like at time of diagnosis, I was there for her, for that conversation, which was wild. And the family spoke Spanish. So we were in there with the interpreter and they wanted me to give my account. I'm a marrow donor. So they wanted me to talk to her about, the process and mostly because they spoke Spanish, but they were Black. So I had kind of gotten roped in. So sometimes, the care team will have that understanding and try to bring someone else in, that they know on the floor.
How do you feel about that? How did you feel about that? I can imagine, I don't want to jump ahead. I can imagine that for you, there's two sides of that story. You're excited because you have an opportunity to do that, but then also like the fact that that's needed is.
Yeah, I was happy to be there for her and for her family. I don't know. I felt fine. I think at the time I was mostly just overwhelmed for her. But it does speak volumes, and it's not like I was unaware. Like I worked there, I knew what the landscape was, and
Right.
actually I was glad I was there because some crazy stuff was kind of being said to her. The physician.
I could only imagine if you weren't there. I could only that's the part that scares me in these situations.
Yeah.
Like if you weren't there, like wow.
Well, yes. And so here's a quick little story about that. So she's obviously crying, right, with this new diagnosis. Like, you're gonna have to go through chemo. And she asked the doctor, will I lose my hair? And the doctor said, yes, you'll probably lose your hair, but don't worry, it'll grow back prettier, it'll be straighter. And I was like, okay. So and like she's just kind of looking around. I think my point in saying that and telling that story is this is why that culturally it's so significant to have people who relate to you in the room. What the last thing you need as a kid getting a cancer diagnosis is a microaggression about your hair falling down. Like that was the last thing she needed on her plate that day,
or a unthought or a quick, common thing that's said for people all the time, and then it comes from somebody, and it completely turns out
unbiased. Right. And it just thoughtless, and but that's the thing, and that's the way that it's insidious, is that it is thoughtless and it's constant.
And not to be, I mean, it happens on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I've lost both my parents. I can't tell you how many times in conversation people say, well, I'm sure your mom, XYZ, and then just assume.
Yeah.
Because I'm 35 years old. So the assumption that my mother, so it's like small things like that. I get inside, I'm like, they don't know. It kills me. I've grieved. I've gone through that process. But this is the type of thing where the big part of clinical trials is what the outcomes aren't seen for years. Is that right? Is that accurate to say?
The outcomes of the clinical trial. Oh, okay. So like the very end. Yeah. It takes
end result.
many, many years.
Right. So I think in this day and age, most people are like instant gratification is like, yeah, I need something right now. Like I have a problem. I want to take care of it right now.
Yeah. But I mean, when I say like a couple of years, I mean like the results. But your personal results, you could like start seeing a benefit from a clinical trial within a couple months. I've seen kids, really heal up
So
you
do people,
know,
so I guess, so then what I would say is, my question would be, should people be looking at it as a personal experience as opposed to a clinical research for a pharma company?
yeah,
Ah,
yeah, I
Both,
know
both.
there's a lot of different ways to like kind of weigh the benefits there, but yeah,
we
there's
might have
personal
to,
benefits.
yeah, we might have to have
Yeah.
a part two of this
Oh,
conversation.
this
Yeah.
is definitely got to be a part two. This is definitely got to be
Uh,
a part two.
I'd say we could probably translate. I know Brandon, you have one more question for Nicole. I know we got some time here. It's a
Yeah.
great conversation. We could talk all day, but
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a part two
part
with
two.
this.
But Brandon,
You just opened up a whole nother, yeah. My other question is like, so somebody, let's say they don't know anything about clinical trials,
Mm.
clinical research, they want to get involved. Um, what do you think is the best thing for them to do? And I guess I'm asking for, I'm gonna go down the road of somebody black or somebody of color,
Mm.
for them to find and like seek the right information. Let's say they don't know anybody that they feel comfortable talking to about this, but this is something
Okay.
that they're thinking of and that they want to do. Like,
Mm.
what advice would you give an individual, person of color, black person,
Mm.
somebody looking to, try to, I guess, ultimately help themselves, but then also
Mhm.
in the process of helping themselves, helping others, through getting involved in the clinical research trial.
Yeah. So, I mean, there obviously is like the clinicaltrials.gov has like a list of everything. And but it is, and they do a pretty good job of putting it in like plain language. So patients kind of understand, what the study's about and whether or not they might, fit the eligibility criteria. That's a place to start looking. But like honestly, I think the easiest pathway is like joining groups. So groups that, are associated with your disease state, because patients talk and they talk as much as they can without, without like messing up your anonymity within a clinical trial, right? So people, once they're out of a clinical trial, then yeah, they'll kind of share their experience. And I
Yep.
think that's the best way. Hearing from other patients who have the same disease state as you. Uh, Outside of those things, I mean, something that I've been working on, I don't know if it exists, but I've been digging around. I haven't found it. I like to develop like on my website kind of a GIS mapping repository for groups like that. So there are a lot of groups within like Chicago or like major cities or even state based that help navigate patients to the proper potential trial, clinical trial or research study.
Correct.
But it's nothing that I've seen that's like homogenous yet, or anything that's kind of like in one repository. And that's something I've been slowly trying to like grab and build in so that people just have a one-stop shop to
Yeah.
kind of click through their area, filter by your disease state, and
Yeah.
find some groups that can help you.
I mean, because you brought up it's clinicaltrials.gov, right?
Yes,
That site is horrible.
it
Just-
is.
I'm just gonna be it's horrible. Like
Yep.
if it was me, like I know how to navigate it, but I'm thinking of
Hmm.
somebody that like I'm thinking of somebody like my mom or a aunt
Hmm.
or maybe a cousin that isn't like doesn't really understand. Nah,
Yeah.
it's not happening. It's
It's
just
not. I had to say it though, because that is where the most comprehensive information
yeah,
is.
yeah.
But like I had to just put that out there and get it out
No,
of the way.
that make
But it's
it's
not great.
yeah, that's we talking about web 3.0. That's like web
we'll
one.
link some, we'll put some relevant, helpful links. One of them
Yeah.
here is just, you mentioned something before, and I want to make sure we call it out. The federally qualified health centers,
Mm,
community-based healthcare providers that receive
yeah.
funds from the Health and Resource Service Administration.
Yes.
And so they primarily provide care and services in underserved areas. And it's,
Yeah.
it's something that we're focused on at Bolus Maximus and overall in the diabetes and in any sickness and health and disease. It's very relevant. So we'll provide these links
Mhm.
um, in the description, your clinicalmistrials.com website, and any other information you want to plug here, Nicole. You're more than welcome to, but we are so definitely looking forward to another conversation with you. And we
Okay,
really
thank you.
appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes. Thank
It's
you.
been great
Thank you.
chatting with my longtime friend.
Yeah, tell us
Brandon,
something.
I have a really cool story about some clinical mistrials out of Ypsilanti. We're gonna have to
Oh,
talk about.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely.
All right.
Nicole, have a great day. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And let's Brandon, close us out.
Hey, hey, Nicole, thank you. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody, keep it 100.
Peace.